Hello there, and welcome to this week's edition of Gina Gardner and Friends. My guest today, Michael Sonbert, he's the founder and CEO of Skyrocket Education and of Rebel Culture. Michael, a huge welcome. Thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Gina, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I know that your work is really important because you do a lot around culture. And I think so many organizations are struggling with a fairly toxic culture. And we're going to be talking about culture in the workplace and how leaders can really impact on that culture. But before we do, tell us a bit about your story and how you've come to be doing what you're doing, really.
Happily, yeah. I started as an educator, and I was a teacher in South Philadelphia for a while, and started to I then coached teachers in the network, and then became the director of strategic partnerships for the charter school network in Philly. And I became obsessed really early on. We would work with schools around the states, and I became obsessed really early on with the how one school in a traditionally underserved, underfunded, high trauma, high crime neighborhood could have a really strong culture, while the school around the block with the same exact obstacles had a toxic adult and student culture. And I said, is this happening in lots of other places, in other industries and other sectors? And it was.
Yeah.
And so I said, I want to do something about that. I think it's crazy that people are spending their entire days working in places where they're miserable and they're unhappy. And I want to help people fix that.
You know, I think we spend so much time at work, don't we?
Yeah.
Most people, it's the major activity of their life. And
Exactly.
if you are living within a culture that is great, it energizes you, it gives you motivation, it helps you feel well. But when you are in a toxic cultural environment, it has the most negative and profound effect on most people who are within it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, we talk to people all the time, and they speak really poorly of their bosses, or sometimes they have the response, which I love, which is, my boss is okay. He leaves me alone, which to me is not, that's it's a real indictment of something that most people spend a third of their adult lives doing, that we either hate our bosses or we tolerate them. And I think that that's a crazy paradigm, and something that I think for years was just the norm. I was joking around with somebody in my life the other day, saying that, like, look at every boss on every TV show. They're always this, like, caricature, this screaming, yelling, unreasonable, erratic, unforgiving type person. And that has to come from somewhere, right? I mean, it was born of people's experiences.
For me, I think being a leader means that before you start to lead anybody else, you have to lead yourself. You have to be taking radical responsibility for how you turn up, how you interact with people, how you model the behaviors and the values of your company or your school or your family, for that matter. That will come based on how you are interacting with yourself, won't it?
100%. And I love what you said there. We one of our in a rebel culture, one of our 5 tenets for building a rebel culture is that the first one is you start with mindset. And I'm often surprised at how few leaders have done the pre-work, for lack of a better term, around, like, well, what do I care about? How am I going to react to things? And what do I believe in as a leader? And how am I going to be perceived here? To your point, a lot of folks, and in some regard, it's, for some people, it's not their fault. They've been promoted to a job. They stepped in. There's no training.
Yeah.
There's no support for them, so they haven't really thought through those pieces. But it really is a problem, because it's going to be really hard for me to lead, whether it's one person or 1,000, if I haven't figured out all these different things that you mentioned. How am I gonna act? What do I care about? What's going to matter here, etc.
It's interesting for me because I learned how to be an effective, and I hope a really good leader, because I worked for two leaders who were dire.
Yeah.
And when I've run leadership courses, and I've run many over the years, when I've said to people, what do you think makes a great leader? And often, to start with, they struggle to know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Ask them, well, what do you think makes a poor leader? And the torrent of the list is huge, and they get very energized about all of the things that they know are wrong. And then you say, well, have you ever thought that just flip those? Just look at if a lack of communication is something that really makes you struggle and feel like that you're not valued, then what does good communication look like? How would that work? How could you ensure that you're communicating your vision, your values, and so on, and they're not just something stuck up in the foyer, but they're actually living and part of your daily conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal observation, and one that's actually really disappointing. I shouldn't be surprised, but we talk to folks all the time who, to your point, they can't really describe what a good leader would be. What we often hear is somebody who doesn't micromanage them. And I actually don't believe that micromanagement is like a real term. It's mostly misused. And I've worked with thousands of leaders. I've never met one micromanager. What I've met are leaders who don't provide expectations for their teams. They don't clarify what the norms are. They don't live the values, and then they come flying in like a firefighter when something's wrong, and they start shaking everything up and scaring the heck out of everybody. And that's what a lot of employees deem micromanaging. That's not micromanagement. That's
Mismanagement,
mismanagement, right? And so it's disappointing to me that what a lot of employees will say a good boss is somebody who just kind of leaves them alone and doesn't bug them, when there's another option there, which is a boss who's highly engaged in the work that they're doing, and who's providing them ongoing feedback and is a collaborator. But we see so few examples of that or at least many employees we talk to have seen so few examples of that, if none at all, that they don't have a frame of reference for it. So it's you're either an ogre, or you leave me entirely alone without anything in the middle. And both of those options to me are pretty bad.
But for me, I like to see it in the round, because we are the common denominators in our life. The likelihood is that however you're turning up in one situation, you're likely to be turning up in another. I work with a lot of business leaders, and one of the things that I find really interesting is that when you first start, the language is very much, if only I could get the right staff. If only if the staff would do as I want them. If only they were more productive. If only, if only, if only. And then I ask them to think about, well, what are you doing that contributes to that?
Right.
And again, it often goes quite silent. And I think that we talk about the word culture, but creating a culture where people feel seen and heard and valued, where their contribution is something that not only do they value themselves, but other people value, I think makes a huge difference. What are the strategies that you use to help companies, or rather leaders, to lead in that, what I would call a much more enlightened way, so that the culture is much more positive?
Well, the first thing that we do, and I agree with everything you just said there, the first thing we do is focus around I mentioned mindset earlier, but really the belief system that the leader has to have, which is that everything here is my responsibility. I've either created it or I'm allowing it to exist. But this idea of I'm this passive observer, as to what's happening in my on my team or in my organization. We obliterate that very early on for the folks for whom that's an obstacle, because if you're the leader and not willing to own the fact that if people are going rogue, if they're underperforming, if they're gossiping, if they're not meeting deadlines, if you're not willing to own the fact that that's all stemming from gaps in your leadership, then there's not a ton of work we're going to be able to do with you, because you think that things are happening by accident. We see it. I was just talking recently to the former CEO of the second largest hospital in New York State, who, when he arrived, they had staff satisfaction rates in the 43rd percentile nationally and patient satisfaction rates in the 17th percentile nationally. And when he left, they were in the 87th and 73rd, respectively, right? Everything was the same. The leader changed.
Yes.
And so that's a huge aspect of it. And so you mentioned things earlier like communication and feedback and really clear expectations for what the work's supposed to look like, which we do all that work as well. None of it, though, really matters if the leader's not willing to see themselves as the lever and as the ultimate responsibility there as well.
What strikes me, well, this is such a rich topic. We could probably talk for five weeks about this and still not have covered it all. But one of the things that strikes me when I work with leaders is that they will often initially have quite a victim mentality. You know, poor me, it's all happening to me, rather than them taking radical responsibility and modeling and having an expectation that the staff will also take radical responsibility for their own performance and know what the criteria for that performance may be, and then collectively a shared responsibility for delivering whatever the vision of the company or the organization, whether it's a school or a business. And I think that for me, one of the things that is a real game changer is getting people to really think about what's the why. You know, why am I in business? And I'll give you an example. I have used this example before, but it just strikes me that we live in a world where skilled workers are in short supply. The organizations that look after their people and value them are going to be much better placed to attract and keep their skilled people. And I was talking to somebody who had a haulage business, and we were talking about the fact that in the UK there was such a shortage of drivers with a heavy goods license who were prepared to come and drive. And we looked at the advert, and the advert said, well, drivers needed. It gave the hourly rate and said how many hours a week that they would work. And it just struck me that there was no incentive. The assumption was that people would just want to work there because they wanted a job.
Because they want money, yeah. And
we talked about, well, what do you believe about your business and your people? What's your vision? And his vision was that they were the lifeblood of the country, that they acted to keep shops and hospitals and schools and other organizations working, that they were the very heartbeat. And I suggested to him that he might think about rewriting his advert, because that's the vision for the company. How did he make that vision a reality? How did he help people recognize that this was what would happen? But he had to put his money where his mouth was. So if that was going to be the case, then the culture must be that people were valued and not just clocking in and clocking off.
Yeah, I think and the revision is much more compelling, right? And would be more compelling for somebody who's looking for a job. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I'm convinced that so many of these gaps from leaders stem from fear, a fear of it's much easier for me to say, you know, here's the hourly rate, here's how many hours it is, than it is for me to say, join a company that's the lifeblood of our country, right? Like, I'm putting myself in a position of vulnerability there, to stand in front of your team and to say, here's why we're doing this. and here's the rationale for why this matters, is much harder than it is, and much scarier than it is to simply send an email and say, hey, we're doing this thing now, and everybody better get on board. Have you found fear come up in your work with leaders? No?
Don't you think that fear is at the basis of pretty well everything, that's not going right? And I think when people understand that going to their workforce and saying, this is what we're aiming for, we know we're not there now, but come and join me in making this dream a reality. You can help me shape the dream, but ultimately what I'm looking to do is to make a positive difference to whoever we're serving, but also valuing and using you, and you become part of the process. Then it's not so scary, because you're not doing it on your own, you're doing it together, and it's a journey, and it's not that you're not at the destination when you start, it's where you're aiming for. And when leaders, I think, are prepared to say, I don't know all the answers, that's why I've got you as part of the team, then I think things open up. But I would say so many leaders are great salesmen or great technicians, and they're suddenly put in the position where they're expected to lead a team of people, and they find it's like herding cats, because they don't know how to position themselves. They haven't done the inner work, they haven't got the insight and some of these skills, and they make a hash of it early on, and so they become more and more defensive.
Yeah, and especially when they've been promoted simply because they are good at sales, as you mentioned, right? But not necessarily, or haven't shown any skill at leading people, or at least not managing an entire team. It's an entirely different skill set. What we've seen play out is that those folks would say, well, why isn't everybody just amazing the way I was amazing? Well, you got promoted to boss, so don't expect everybody to be you. You got your job for a reason. I do actually think, as a side note, it's one of the real misses in just leadership and training in general, that people are just promoted to jobs without given nearly enough tools to be successful. And so now I'm the boss of a team of, let's just say, a small team of 10 people, because I was really good at my previous job. I haven't shown that I can manage anybody, but now I'm the boss of a team of people. And what we see is that folks most often come in and they're very hesitant and they don't make decisions. And now they're like concerned about how their leadership's going to be received. And now it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the people on the team are like, oh, well, this person can't lead us. They're hesitant. They don't make decisions quickly. They're, and I'm all for collaboration, but there comes a point where a leader has to say, hey, here's how we're going to do things. And if you have feedback, let me know. But it's very often missing. And so now we talk about the Friday night drive home. We know a lot of leaders who are driving home on Friday nights with a pit in their stomach, like, I missed dozens of opportunities to make my team better. I don't know if my team respects me. I want to go back to my old job. This is terrifying. Like, I feel totally ineffective. And it's a real miss in the work.
I think you're absolutely right. And, in the UK, over half the prescriptions in the UK are for antidepressants.
Wow.
And most people who are depressed work in some way, at least contributes. And for some people, it's the major part of the problem. Let's imagine that somebody has just been promoted. They've been promoted because they are good at what they do. They are a new leader, and there may not be training available through the firm. What advice would you give to either a very new leader or a leader who is really worried that they haven't made a good start and that they want to do things differently?
Great. Well, I'll give some tangible things that a leader could do in a second. But the first thing I would say is that they should get a coach. And there are tons of coaches out there.
I agree with you.
Right. Like if you're not getting developed internally. And by the way, sometimes the internal development is not worth a whole lot. It's
often
more
a
like
tick box exercise, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right. So I would say that folks should get a coach, and maybe your bosses might even pay for it, or you can get the company to pay for it. So I would say get a coach, which is just invaluable to have the perspective of somebody outside of your organization. And beyond the stuff that we mentioned around the leader really defining like who they are and what matters to them. I mean, they really should go through a process of like, what matters to me? What am I going to care about? What am I going to be absolutely maniacal about? Not that I'll be a maniac about it, but like be maniacal about, like, right, if we sell sneakers, like the fit has to be perfect. We have to have the most comfortable shoes on the planet, right? Do I really care about the packaging? Maybe I don't care about much, all that much about the packaging, but folks should go through that process. Beyond that, maybe the most important thing that a leader can do is to get feedback from their team. Formally do a survey, and you may not have the culture where surveys are normalized, and folks may think that you're going to know it's me. So make the questions generic enough that it wouldn't give anybody away, and make sure that they're anonymous. But get the actual, real, straight scoop from the people on the team about what's actually happening. Because, Gina, I can't tell you how many people I get, probably a half a dozen emails a week from an employee. We work with the bosses, but I get an email from an employee that sounds like, can you please coach my boss? He or she is blah, 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 and they communicate late and they yell and this or whatever it is, which they don't understand. But you can't tell them I reached out to you. I said, look, it's a very hard to send somebody a cold email and say, I've got some inside information about you and you need this work. But it blows my mind that the employers don't know, and they haven't created a space for people to say what's there for them. You should, but leaders, when I lead 2 teams, I get feedback often from the people on my team that stings. That's like, oof, man, that hurts. I can't believe we dropped the ball in that way. Thank you so much. We built that culture. Others should do the same.
But I think you go back to what you said earlier in the program, is that fear is what stops people asking that question. And so I'd suggest that you start with yourself and look at your beliefs about you and how you're doing. And think about whether your ego comes to work with you or whether you leave it at home under your pillow with your pajamas or your nightdress. And if you're so worried that everything has to be done your way, or that you need to be seen to be right rather than looking for the best way forward, be honest with yourself. I think for me, one of the things that really is a crunch situation is those people who don't confront the issue because they believe they've got to be confrontational about it, rather than recognizing if they get their own emotional state under control, they can confront the issue in an assertive way, but never aggressive, never volatile, because they've got themselves under control. And so people don't wriggle because there's a very calm, neutral combination of communication and being clear about what it is you want, why what's happened isn't working. And for me, the culture should always be about development and learning rather than blame.
Yeah, I agree. I think to piggyback off what you said, leaders also need to define exactly what the expectations are, because It's much easier to have a tough conversation. It doesn't even have to be a tough conversation. Like, so for instance, on our team, well, I'm obsessive when it comes to like timeliness, and we need to come to meetings on time. We need to be on time for our meetings with our partners and this and that. My belief is like, if we should never make people wait. It doesn't respect their time. But B, if we can't figure out the easy stuff in this work, we're never going to be able to figure out the hard stuff. And if we can't get to work on time, or we can't get to a meeting on time, good luck trying to actually coach somebody who's having like a crisis. So because I've made it really clear that that's an expectation, I'm then able to address somebody who shows up to a meeting 2 minutes late and be like, hey, what's going on, right? Assuming they didn't communicate in advance. Far too few leaders say, here's what matters here.
Yeah.
And then it makes those tough conversations much easier because we've agreed on those things, versus it seeming random.
you know, that bit of conversation is very timely because we've come to the end of the show and I get into trouble if we go over time. It's been a joy to talk to you. And I would say to anybody out there, reach out. Where can they find you?
Great. Yeah. Our website is rebelculture.com. And you can also email me at michael@rebelculture. And I'm also on all the social media places, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. So folks can check me out there.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you think about leadership. Do email me at Gina, Gina, at Gina Gardner and Friends. Thank you so much for joining us both on the show. Thank you, Michael. It's been a joy. And thank you for listening. Take care now.